Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Lord Gord Podcast. This is your host, Lord Gord. I'm giving you information that's factually correct and politically incorrect. And I have a little joke for you. What's the opposite of a hot dog? A chili dog. Alright, so this week I'm going to be taking some great information from a great Thomas Sowell book, two great Thomas Sowell books, Economic Facts and Fallacies, and Wealth, Poverty, and Politics. I'm going to be talking about third world facts and fallacies. It's going to be a hodgepodge of facts about the third world. Many misconceptions are going to be debunked here in the podcast. And I really think this is important because so much of the nonsense being taught not only in K through 12 school but in universities and being parroted in movies and other leftist mills of indoctrination like tech is that people are poor because the rich exploit them, and exploitation is the reason that people are poor. The United States is some great evil that puts people down, and most importantly, that people become wealthy at the expense of others, which is a lie. That's a zero-sum fallacy. The fact that some people gain by other people losing. That was before we had free market capitalism, and feudalism, serfdom, monarchy, even socialism. But in the free market, you're able to create wealth and become wealthy by serving others. Any country has been tried, and it has literally raised the living standards of everyone in the country. So let's break down some of these myths here. Myth number one, the myth of overpopulation. Contrary to popular belief, there is no consistent relationship between overpopulation and poverty. Let me give you some examples. Japan has more people per square mile than India and also has a higher per capita income than India. Poor sub-Saharan Africa also has a fraction of the population density in Japan, yet their per capita income does not come close to that of Japan. And just some more things to throw out there about this overpopulation stuff. Literally within every country, whether it's United States, Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, we've had growing populations for hundreds of years, yet our living standards, our per capita income, and the amount of goods and services that we create and consume have only gone up. See, it makes sense in a zero-sum view of the world if there's some finite amount of resources and that people have to keep taking from. Yeah, that would make sense. It would be like if there's one pizza at a party and you have two people, they get a certain amount, but if you invite 16 more people, you have to keep breaking up the pizza. That's how people think. But the reality is, if that truly were the case, we would not be living any better than we were living in a Stone Age level. We create the wealth, we create the goods and services. Just because there's a finite amount of a resource doesn't mean we're close to reaching that limit. And wherever free market capitalism has been tried, like I said, it's raised the living standards of everyone, and you create wealth. It's not stolen from someone else. It is created. We create more chickens. We create more houses. We create more TVs. We create more food. All right? So in the United States of America, only 5% of all land has been developed. Repeat that correctly. All these people who advocate for open zone laws and all these laws that make it prohibitive to build houses, which causes the housing prices to skyrocket, only 5% of all land in the United States has been developed. Forests cover 6 times as much land as all the cities and towns in this country put together. Another fact I found through John Stossel was that I believe for the next 1,000 years we could bury all our trash in 9 square miles. For the next 1,000 years. So it's a complete farce that we're running out of resources or things of that sort. It's a lie. Let's talk about myth number 2, exploitation. Vladimir Lenin's theory of imperialism is as follows. Surplus capital in free market societies would be invested in third world countries, which would bring further returns on investment. These further returns would be used by the entrepreneurs to forestall the workers' revolution and would impoverish the third world. So in other words, this is the zero-sum fallacy again. They're saying in the first world, they're creating so much wealth that they're going to have a surplus of it, as though they invest it in the third world to extract their wealth and give it to their workers, and then the third world becomes impoverished. See, if you have a zero-sum view of the world, that is somehow plausible, but when you look at facts and evidence, it's nonsense. Let's go through the facts and evidence. Okay, so Lenin's chart displaying the evidence of his theory was incredibly vague, because he showed investment from from countries like Great Britain, France, so on and so forth, and where they invested. So it was 3 blocks. Block number 1 was Europe. Block number 2 was America. Block number 3 was like Asia, Africa, Australia. Very vague. So the category America literally consisted of the entirety of North and South America. So you didn't know where the investments were going. But when you looked at facts, the fact was that the United States was the largest recipient of foreign investment then, back in the early 20th century, and they are still the largest recipient of foreign investment now. The U.S. invested more in Canada than Asia and Africa combined. And the fact of the matter is, Asia was not a place of investment until countries like Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Japan started opening up themselves to the free market and opening themselves up to foreign trade, so on and so forth. And that really happened in the late 60s, early 70s. So countries that embraced the free market, like the countries I just mentioned before, with low tariffs, low taxes, limited government, pro-free market, they became far richer than countries that followed dependency theory, like Nicaragua, Cuba, Argentina, various African nations, so on and so forth. So let's go through some facts about that. Singapore went from having a per capita income, of 54% of the world's average in 1970 to 321% of the world's average today. Argentina went from being in the top 10 of richest nations in the world in the early 20th century to being one of the worst countries in the world regarding economic freedom. Foreign investments went from 48% in Argentina in 1913 to just 5% by the 1950s. Countries grouped with Argentina in the early 20th century have attained per capita GNPs of about 4 or 5 times that of Argentina. Here's a stat on Cuba for you. 40 years after the Cuban Revolution and the Cuban refugees arrived in the United States, the total revenue of Cuban businesses was greater than the total revenue of the entire nation of Cuba. So in other words, if dependency theory and exploitation are supposed to make people poor, why in all the countries that attracted foreign investment and did the antithesis of dependency theory, why did they all become prosperous and raise the living standards of everyone in the country, while those that practiced the dependency theory, isolationism, socialism, top-down centralized control, why are they all poor? Man, I just can't get my head around it. All right, let's talk about natural resources not equaling prosperity. This is myth number 3. Though Saudi Arabia is the world's largest oil producer, the per capita income in the country is half of what it is in Singapore, a country with no natural resources. And Lee Kuan Yew talks about that in his book, From Third World to First, how when England was getting ready to leave Singapore and they were going to be on their own, he talked to various people, and some people were saying, hey, don't allow any foreign investments. They were selling him on this dependency theory garbage. And he said it was garbage at the time. He said, listen, we don't even have any natural resources to exploit, and we need jobs. So if they're going to bring jobs, come on over. Worked out for him, didn't work out for those hellhole countries. Okay. Russia is the world's largest producer of natural gas, yet isn't in the top 70 in per capita income. South Africa is the largest producer of gold, but is 69th in income per capita. The value of natural resources in Venezuela is several times what it is in Japan or Switzerland, but per capita income in the latter countries dwarfs the former. And I forget, was it David Landes or one of these guys who basically had this theory that said, you know, a surplus of natural resources can be a hindrance because you never learn to economize. You never learn how to allocate scarce resources efficiently. So these countries the majority of their people end up being poor because usually the governments are running the businesses. And if anyone knows this, if the government ran the Sahara Desert, they'd run out of sand. They are an awful allocator of resources. They are not able to set prices. They're not able to engage in the feedback mechanisms of the free market because they're able to set their own prices. They can force people to pay them. They have a monopoly. They limit competition. And they really have no incentive to economize whatsoever. So those are a few facts and fallacies about the third world. I was also reading about Nigeria. And Nigeria having a wealth of natural resources, but because of corruption and top-down centralized control, the country is mostly poor. So Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, really not many natural resources, yet they're extremely prosperous. In countries like Nigeria, Russia, Venezuela, they're well endowed naturally, but they are third world hellholes. So it matters how the economy is run. If the economy is freer, if people are able to engage in trade, if people are able to engage in the free market and deal with the consequences and the rewards of free exchange, then those countries are usually far more prosperous than those that are controlled by a top-down centralized government in which a small concentrated elite make decisions for millions of people and pay no price for being wrong. Think about that. That's the Lord Gord Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe on iTunes. Subscribe on YouTube. Leave a comment. Leave a review. Share it with your friends. Let's spread this thing. Get the Lord Gord Funk album, This Isn't TV, on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Tidal, YouTube, so on and so forth. Share that. Next week, I'm going to talk about this article that my mother showed me in Time Magazine. It almost made my head explode. But it was essentially saying that teachers are underpaid and that the government needs to extract more money from the taxpayers in order for them to succeed. And I'm going to tear that up. They are liars and communists and totalitarians and enemies of freedom. That's what I'm going to talk about next week. So thank you so much for listening. I'm Lord Gord. I'll talk to you next time.